During the ongoing two sessions, legislator Huang Xihua's proposal has drawn wide media attention and fierce online debate, saying that out-of-wedlock births should not be discriminated against in receiving social benefits, such as the household registration document, in getting access to public education and health care. So what is the status quo of China's unmarried mothers? How will the out-of-wedlock births impact China's society and traditional values? And why is it becoming a global trend? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Li Jingzhao from the Beijing Foreign Studies University and Flora Liu, CEO of Joyview Education. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Here is one issue that may worry ladies and women alike. For example, the NPC deputies' proposal on granting unmarried women equal rights to have babies has triggered a fierce online debate about China's Sina Weibo. What are your thoughts, Jingzhao?
Well, this deputy member, Huang Xihua, she's a very productive member. She proposed altogether 18 suggestions in the field.
Activist? A women rights activist?
She is a very popular deputy member among the general public. They call her the Wang Hong 代表, because every year she proposes something that sounds very shocking, but actually best represents the general convictions of the public. So among the 18 proposals she suggested this year, one is, several are related to women's birth rights, and also the registration of hukou for children out of wedlock marriage. So I think it's a very good move. It really suggests that women are demanding more. Women are expecting to have a separation between marriage and birth rights. So I think we're on the right track.
Look, Flora, we could look at the issue from different layers in terms of both Chinese traditional culture or our process of being globalized. You've got to be a responsible member of the international society by granting equal rights to women one way or another. But what's your way of examining this case, particularly about the hukou? Hukou, you know, is an issue that has been put under scrutiny for years during the process of urbanization, like migrant workers, should they enjoy equal rights? Because they have made so much contribution to the change of skylines in major cities. Now, first of all, the hukou system, do you think this is one of the obstacles that prevent unmarried women from getting the legitimate document for their children out of the wedlock?
Actually, unmarried women still have the right to get hukou, except that they have to pay a hefty fine. I don't think it's reasonable, because according to the marriage law, even the children born out of wedlock still enjoy the same rights as the children born out of children to a married couple. And I do think that even a woman does not get married, she still has the fertility rights. She enjoys the fundamental human right of giving birth to a child. So I don't understand why there's a fine here. So if a woman wants to get a child a hukou right now, she has to pay a very heavy fine. And I remember a few years ago, a Beijing couple, without getting married, had a child, and in order to pay the fine, they started a crowdfunding event, and that has stirred controversies on the internet. And personally, I supported them because I think this is their right to get their kid a hukou. But a lot of people say that they are irresponsible parents. So I think it's a good sign that a representative has proposed that unmarried women needs to be granted the same rights, and I hope this will become the reality in the future.
Yeah, hukou is very important.
What's behind the opposition voice?
If you do not have a hukou...
What's behind the opposition voice, please?
Opposition voice insists that child should be a legitimate offspring within the wedlock. So childbirth should come after formal government recognized marriage. So no marriage, no birth of children.
How likely is this proposal translated into legislation? What's the majority view about this controversial issue?
According to the internet polls, over 90% of people polled, they think that women should have the fertility rights. So the percentage is really high. And in terms of the likelihood of having the suggestion transformed into act or policy, maybe because now one of the priorities of our national plan is to make sure that by the year of 2020, China's population will maintain at 1.4 billion. So the government and the general public are sharing the consensus that we should try all different means to make sure that we reach that population threshold.
Flora, some say allowing women to give birth outside of marriage may compromise traditional patriarchy. Do you agree?
Yeah. I think marriage, at some aspect, is an institution to reinforce patriarchy. And in the past, women were married to a man in order for financial survival, but now women do not depend on men for survival anymore. And if women has the right to have a child without a man, but of course with the presence of a sperm donor, I think this is challenged patriarchy fundamentally.
But at the same time, we also have a lot of LGBTQI group. They also want the rights to marriage, and they also want the rights to have their own child or their children, and the rights to adopt. So
what's the progress in legislation about marriage of the same sex in China?
The progress now, the current discussion on the rights of single women to have birth and to be able to register hukou for their children is not even considering the sexual minority groups yet. But among the proposing groups in favor of this new move in legislature, actually a huge amount of this proposing force
a couple
comes
of years
from
ago,
the
when I was
minorities,
roaming the street of
minority.
New York, I was greeted with a picture of jubilation when so many gay people were waving the rainbow flags to celebrate the victory in the Supreme Court. People of the same sex could get married. I mean, this is indeed a landmark success, even in the U.S. process of legislation and the rule of law. Having said this, actually under Chinese law, unmarried women have the right to give birth, and children born out of outlook are guaranteed the same rights as the others. However, as legacy of the one-child policy, let's look at the issue of family planning policy, most provinces in China still fine unmarried mothers for giving birth. How do you look at the weak enforcement of the law at the provincial level? Do you think that some of the government officials start to show sympathy with the single parent and this kind of a violation of the one-child policy?
I think the sudden favorable turn towards giving rights to the single mothers is because of the change of the policy from one-child to two-child policy in 2015. Before 2015, the very strict implementation of one-child policy actually was the priority. A lot of people did not even check the marriage law in China, because the marriage law in China does not distinguish or does not discriminate married or single mother in terms of their rights of giving birth. But so in this aspect, we can see that the policy, the policy implementation, because of this one-child priority, actually has run in conflict with the law of marriage in China for years, for decades.
Flora, in China, unmarried women are not allowed to access assisted reproductive technology such as the in vitro fertilization or egg freezing. How do you read into these restrictions?
I think this is unreasonable. And I want to quote from Randy Lausch. He said, "Brick walls are there for a reason. They're not here to stop us. but to test how strong our wills are to do something. So for women who really want to do something, they will eventually find a way. For example, the Hollywood movie star Lucy Liu and Chinese actress and the director Xu Jinlei all frozen their egg, and Lucy Liu even got a baby out of it. So I think even though egg freezing technology and IVF are considered illegal in China, in the future it's going to be a trend. I've seen a lot of women went to abroad to have their egg frozen and have IVF, so this is something that cannot be stopped.
And actually, a lot of women can't even afford having their eggs frozen because it costs a lot of money, very costly. It's not affordable to general pink-collar or white-collar women. You need to have a lot of financial support to freeze your eggs.
Jindao, here is a sensitive issue. Since women's rights are part of human rights, which are indicative of the social progress in this process of globalization, through what channels do most women activists lobby for their legitimate rights? Do you think their voices could be heard in time effectively by decision makers in China?
Well, I'm happy to see two changes. First, the change is that a lot of women deputy members to the People's Congress, they are playing a more and more prominent and proactive role. So, as an example of Huang Xihua, she, for just one session, she prepared 18 proposals. So there are a lot of active women deputy members like her. On the other hand, a lot of NGOs and a lot of government agencies are preparing for a long time before the session, before the two sessions begin, to send their proposals through these women deputy members. For instance, an NGO woman, she sent to all women deputy members, over 676 of them, the proposal that the government should be really strict on all the employees who practice discrimination in employment. So that's a solid example. So I'm really happy to see these two changes.
And Mr. Yang, what do you think we're doing here today? As a businesswoman, I postponed my business trip to be on this show just to voice our thoughts and to advocate for our rights.
What about a second look at the sensitive issue of sex workers in China? Because that has also a lot to do with rights of women. Back in 1995, when in Huairou, the NGO session of the 4th Women's Conference took place, and I was there as a reporter of a CCTV News to cover issues concerning the well-being and dignity of women. Sex workers allegedly took to the street to demonstrate and to demand their rights. That was very, very sensitive to Chinese authorities, who were caught ill-prepared for such sort of a release of a public sentiment. So now we are living in the 21st century. What do you think of the Chinese attitude towards this? There's of course crackdown on red light districts in China, but what can you say to update the Chinese audience, and particularly those Western audiences who follow closely this issue?
Yeah, well, I have to say that there is this de facto industry of sex service in China, but it is not recognized as legitimate. A lot of people, a lot of feminists and a lot of NGOs have been proposing to legitimize sex service, because only after the legalization can you protect these women who are already in sex industry.
Having said this, reports show that women are responsible for 41% of the Chinese GDP, the highest proportion in the world, and some 80% of global female self-made billionaires are Chinese. So the question is, what could be contributing to the increasing female participation at work in China, and how do you see women empowerment around the world? Do you think China is way behind the level of women participation politically compared with the industrial nations?
There are different indices to measure women's achievements in terms of gender equality or lack of equality. So in the aspect of political participation, yes, we are not as advanced as many Scandinavian countries, and also.
Oh, you mean South Asia?
Yeah, and South Asia, some South Asia countries. But in terms of women's participation in workforce, we are #1. And also in terms of the percentage of women who are self-made entrepreneurs and the richest entrepreneurs, we are also #1. And in terms of women's proportion or representation in different levels of education, we are also very far ahead. So although we still have illiteracy, but we are achieving a lot in many aspects. So
Professor Li is suggesting quietly that late Chairman Mao Zedong deserves credit for liberating women from household chores and kitchens by encouraging them to account for half of the sky from day one of new PRC, I mean the People's Republic of China, in 1949. Do you agree that in this particular area, the liberalization of women and our move to empower women, particularly in recent years, should deserve credit and should capture more media attention?
Yeah, I definitely hope that the representative get more media attention. I think the awareness needs to be raised. And actually, if we fully liberate women's power, and China's GDP could grow even more. With respect to what Professor Li just said, I don't think gender discrimination in China's workplace has been eliminated. Just a couple of days ago, I was recruiting for my company, and I noticed that for a lot of companies, in their job description, they say men only or required men. And when they post jobs that targeting women, they could tie the job ads specifically to women's facial attributes, like the woman needs to be good looking in order to have an interview with this job, and they have to be at least 1.6 meters tall. And I don't think that's very fair for women.
Mm-hmm. That's why one exciting aspect of this year's session, at the government's report, it has been clearly stated that the focus of this coming year's job, a priority is given on prevention of all forms of discrimination against women in employment, including at the interviews, you can't ask a woman her age, you can't ask her about her marital status, you can't ask her whether she has a child or when she intends to have a child. So all those questions are actually strictly forbidden. So it's the first time for a government report to openly state that these are unprofessional practices, actually, or against the policy of women's rights in China. So
thank you so much. You're watching Dialogue with Professor Li Jinzhao from Beijing Foreign Studies University and Flora Liu, CEO of Joyview Company. We're discussing impact of women's lib as well as women's rights in China. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Here is something that may have aroused the attention from American friends across the Pacific. Impact or spillovers of the MeToo movement. Not half as many as what happened in Hollywood or elsewhere in the United States occurred in China. What is it that has prevented MeToo movement from breaking out and enjoying powerful spillovers in this country?
I think primarily it's the culture of shaming. Even for those women who are brave enough to speak out and say that they are victims of sexual harassment, people's attention is immediately focused on these women instead of focusing on the violators of work ethics, or instead of focusing on the perpetrators. So the culture of shaming is really, really strong in China. That's why in China's MeToo movement, we only see individual cases exposed through media, through social media. We do not see the sea of people, of women coming out and saying that I was a victim of sexual harassment.
I think we're making progress. Chinese women are definitely making progress. I didn't pay much attention to MeToo movement, but I also noticed that 2 students in the academia actually reported the professors of sexual harassment, and that went viral on the internet. So it is not true to say that MeToo movement is not a big thing in China. It is a big thing, but I expect it to become even more viral in the future to raise people's attention and to tell people what is the fine line between sexual harassment and a normal conversational behavior. Sometimes Chinese women don't understand where's the line, and most Chinese men definitely don't know where the line is. So still we need to teach the public.
But the situation is still very severe. Among all the over 80 cases exposed in the past year, only 3 men of those 80 cases, they have received formal punishment, either as removing from their job post or removing from their research fundings. All the other men are not being duly punished or duly investigated yet.
To draw a red line is one matter. To keep in mind a broad picture concerning Chinese traditional culture is an entirely different thing. For example, do you think China has more of a problem concerning male chauvinism? Because we basically live in a pre-modern society. The idea of giving equal access to women and to pay respect to women, the other half of the world, was after all initiated by late Mao Zedong in 1949, 70 years ago. So do you think it takes time for the general population in China to catch up? With more students coming back from Europe and the United States, do you think they will come back with more ideas on equal rights?
We're definitely progressing slowly, but sometimes you see the progress as 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. In terms of the women's liberalization policy under Mao era, I just want to say that it's one thing to liberate women for the sake of national growth and development. It's another thing to liberate women because it's their rights to be liberated, to be free. There is a very subtle difference here, sometimes a very drastic difference here. I think we have a lot to achieve in terms of really respecting women's rights. For instance, right now we're proposing that, or the deputy members, they're proposing that single women's fertility rights should be recognized, should be observed. Well, because after 2015, we have the 2-child policy. So the whole premise is, if we open up fertility rights to single women, they can help giving birth to more babies. Again, the priority is not the rights of these women. Still, they are doing this because our country needs them to produce more babies. These are 2 different
Laura, Women's Day is not just a festival in China. It's a festival for women around the world. Now, you spoke of women in Scandinavian countries who have equal participation in politics. And in the case of South Asia, in some countries, you also see so many women politicians, like Benazir Bhutto, who was assassinated, Madam Kumaratunga, former president of Sri Lanka, who lost one of her eyes in the political assassination, and they deserve credit for the guts, bravery, and giving women equal rights in the labor force. So what can we learn from other countries that you're familiar with? You graduated from the United States, so, but how much do you learn about Europe, South Asia, or even our neighboring country of Japan, where you have a woman Secretary of Defense?
are you encouraging me to run for, a job in the politics? No, I'm not interested in politics, but that doesn't mean that I don't advocate for women's rights. I enjoy business. That's why, starting from a young age, I've been doing business, and gradually I won my parents' support. Initially, they didn't think it's a good idea because they think the perfect job for a girl is either to be a teacher or working in the government and find a good husband, and then you're done. Enjoy your life. But after I graduated from the U.S., I wanted to become a role model for girls and women, so I did my education business, and every day what I do is to encourage and empower the girl students. In them, I see a lot more potential, and I hope that the parents of those girl students know how special their kids are, and I hope they have the equally high expectations for their girls instead of lowering their expectations merely because of their gender. And when I studied in the U.S., one thing I learned is that never to put your photo, your gender, your age, and marital status in your resume. But when I came back to China, when I began to recruit for my employees, I noticed a lot of women applicants put their photos, usually heavily photoshopped in a very cute selfie mode, and put their age on the resume, and it's clearly stated that they're either single or they're married but has a child. They think only those two status are safe. If a woman is married but does not have a child yet, means the woman is ready to give a child, and that will mess up her work. So one thing I told my employees is, in the future, please never ever share those personal details to even your employer. I don't think it's fair for you, and I don't want you to put yourself at a disadvantaged position.
Given this very embarrassing part of Chinese corporate culture, are you going to see more of such cultural shocks? For example, in a Western country where you have the merger and acquisition, you have the Chinese investment, and then don't you think Chinese executives will have to keep in mind the legal risks in the protection of women's rights?
Well, Chinese firms going to the international markets, they have their own cultural consultants and social consultants. They tell them what kind of cultural norms, social norms they have to observe. Otherwise, they will be heavily fined to pay because they violate the employee's rights. But in China, if you do not put those information on your resume, they will immediately toss your resume. They will not consider even hiring you. Yeah, thank you, because private corporations, private companies are really helping to make the change more obvious. But for all the prominent government agencies and institutions, I don't think you can leave all the information, personal information, biographical information blank.
Thank you so much. That's the end of this very interesting dialogue on women's rights. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.